Globalization will not completely go away.
China world.
A multipolar approach, a global cooperation. So it's a huge challenge. Present the facts. Having back soup video was a fake. That illusion is over for good. Let's hope for a normal life to come soon.
Or what is the new normal? Welcome to Scholar Talk, where we discuss on the most relevant topics of the day with experts and thought leaders from around the SCO region. Today we have Abhishek Bhaya, an international editor from CGTN Digital, working from home in Beijing now, where he manages world news section and routinely writes on geopolitical and international affairs. Abhishek, brother, how are you?
I'm fine. Thanks for having me. Actually, it's quite interesting to be on the other side of the camera of the interview for me, because it's usually I am interviewing someone else, but it's interesting to be on the other side today.
It's a pleasure, and thank you for being with us. Abhishek, very, very interesting times we live in today. You've been covering COVID since the outbreak, from the beginning of it all. Take us through your experience during quarantine and the process of covering the news during the 2 months of the epidemic.
Well, I would start by saying that, journalists are a tribe that can't exist without interacting with people. And people are the source of news for us, And in the current situation when social distancing and quarantine are the two global mantras, that is precisely what we are being asked not to do, not to meet people, not to have meetings, and so on and so forth. So this certainly posed a huge challenge during the initial days of the outbreak, when we were still used to do things in the traditional mode, when we used to go with our crew and meet people, interview people, and report from the ground and so on. So initially, most of us thought that the epidemic will go away in weeks, but once the strict measures were introduced and we understood that the situation is going to last for long, all of us had to devise new strategies. So at CGTN, barring the essential staff required to run the daily operations, most of us were given the flexibility of working from home. So I have been working from home for the past nearly 9 weeks now. And thanks to online technology such as Zoom, on which we are just having this interview, Skype and WeChat, we have been able to connect to people. So we have kind of have a new strategy in terms of reaching out to people and interviewing their views on Skype or Zoom. So I have personally conducted interviews of various experts from across the world on the fallout of COVID-19. So at a personal level, there are certainly quite a few challenges working from home. Managing time is the key when you are home, because when it becomes office, you lose track of time completely. Let me confess, I have struggled immensely trying to simultaneously handle both the fronts, working, interviews, and then cooking. Cooking has been therapeutic to me, but still there have been days when I simply lost track of time, and mentally it felt as if I was at work on 24-hour shift. So basically you have to multitask to see that you don't mess up in either of the fronts. However, let me also stress that not all reporting can be done online. So CGTN has been at the forefront of COVID-19 coverage right from day one. And within China, we have several of our colleagues reporting live from ground zero, so to speak. Thanks to their courage and professionalism, we have been constantly reporting on the situation from Wuhan, from Hubei province, and from different hotspots of the COVID-19 outbreak. And also, now that the pandemic is global, our network of international journalists are also bringing daily updates from across the world, despite all the challenges. So these are certainly challenging times, but we are kind of strategizing. We are changing our attitude towards how to collect news and broadcast or transmit it to our audience as we go.
As COVID-19 started, you were at the forefront of the story. Share with us, what were some of the challenges, the most difficult challenges as a reporter of the story, especially when everything changes day to day, was for you?
Right. So there were two things. One, of course, we were getting news of the pandemic during the initial days from Wuhan and Hubei province. And even in Beijing, there was no, basically it was not recognized that this pandemic will, that time it was not a pandemic, that this outbreak would actually become a global pandemic. It would reach Beijing. But once the government announced a lockdown of Hubei province, and there were certain safety protocols imposed, and even at the organization level, as in we were walking into our offices with our temperature checks and thermal scanner in places, and so on and so forth. So we started realizing the gravity of the situation, that this is a different situation. This is not a usual outbreak which is just going to go away in 2 or 3 weeks. So at the organization level, there were a lot of measures which was taken for the safety of people. That also kind of, in a way, made all of us realize the gravity of the situation. So I told you about the thermal scanners, but then office, they started issuing certain safety protocols to be followed by all the staff. We had to wear masks, even when before it was made mandatory in public places. Otherwise, we were given a notice saying that you have to wear mask at all time in office when you are working. The office restaurants were closed, and food were being just distributed in packages, and so on and so forth. So the issue became very close to us in that sense, because we could see the changes happening right in our surroundings.
Right, in real time.
Yes. And then of course, we had our reporters on the ground, and they were sending us the visuals and the stories and what was going on. And so I think to that extent that we had, in a way, the information was first hand, we were getting it before everyone else was. The realization is already stuck in most of the CGTN staff that this is something which is going to be big in the coming days. And of course, when you are reporting, then you are also in the front line, so to speak. So you have to think in terms of all the staff and crew who are going to report on these stories, who are visiting the hospitals, who are interviewing the doctors who were exposed to, the frontline workers who are exposed to the virus, and the journalists are going, or the crew is going to interview, or so on and so forth in the initial days. So their safety was also at stake. And we were very grateful that, of course, right at the beginning, the organization understood the safety protocols that have to be followed. And also there were certain big donors in terms of when people were reporting from Wuhan. So the reporters, it was almost like reporting from, from a war, when a war is going on, from a battlefield.
Yeah, from the ground zero of the war.
From the ground zero. So we were thankful that some of these donors came up with help, and they provided the PPE, which were meant for the doctors and the healthcare workers, which were provided to the reporters as well, because without that you can't report. So things were changing at every level on how you are reporting things and on how you are also working, because the environment in the workspace is changing. It's no more normal. Something has changed completely. And of course, with time, with more stringent measures in place, and social distancing became more critical, and then we were asked to work from home as much as possible. A lot of people, but of course, a channel like CGTN, a broadcaster like CGTN can't work without the essential staff still going to work every day. So of course, our the production control staff, the studio staff, a lot of journalists, the copy editors who had to be there right there to kind of, if there are breaking news and so on and so forth. So they had to mandatorily go to work every day. And some of us were allowed to work from home. So that's the huge change that we saw in the past few weeks.
All right, huge challenge. Now now we know that the entire world is facing COVID-19. What do you think, in your personal opinion, is the difference between the approach taken in China, which you witnessed firsthand and which you reported about, and other countries? Because there was a month or month and a half or so between the outbreak in China and then spreading all over the world. So many of the countries had time to prepare. Did you think that they did an adequate job? And what do you think is the stark difference between the approaches?
So I think the basic difference is the realization of the gravity of the crisis. At
Mm,
the earlier stages of the outbreak, I think most countries saw it strictly as a Chinese problem. So while China, along with perhaps some other East Asian countries like South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, and Singapore, got into a war mode right at the beginning of the outbreak, many of the Western countries, particularly including the US, and of course, as we see in Italy, France, Germany, UK, they failed to acknowledge the severity of the crisis and were rather late in taking effective action, despite the fact that they had this advantage of time because China kind of was already dealing with it and they had kind of a advance notice of at least 3 weeks to 4 weeks.
yes, and by closing down Hubei, which is 58 million people, they sort of gave that advantage to other countries and shielded many of the countries from the outbreak.
Exactly, exactly. So I'm coming to that. So, in fact, even after the WHO described COVID-19 as a global pandemic, many world leaders, including US President Donald Trump and British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who was later found positive with the virus and earlier today admitted to intensive care. I hope he kind of recovers soon. They were extremely callous and irresponsible in the public statements they made about the crisis. So this was the biggest difference, the attitude towards COVID-19. And as you just said, that when China imposed unprecedented measures such as the locking down of Wuhan and Hubei province with a population of nearly 60 million, almost the size of Italy, and it implemented strict quarantine and social distancing norms across the country, these were actually criticized by the Western leadership and media for being draconian and violating human rights. In hindsight, though, these very measures, lockdown, quarantine, social distancing, and I would also add the mandatory use of masks in public, now are being universally accepted as the only way to fight the virus. So considering this is the only way to fight the virus, that is until a vaccine is found, I think China and other East Asian countries perhaps were the most suited to deal with the crisis. They had perhaps the best political, social, and traditional, and even economic capacities to handle the pandemic, as is quite evident by the contrast we see in the containment of COVID-19 in these East Asian countries vis-a-vis the rest of the world, and particularly the US and Europe. So I think that East Asia's experience with previous outbreaks like SARS and MERS might have come handy this time, with people better prepared mentally to deal with the current pandemic. They must have learned from their past experiences and also mistakes, and therefore they were quicker to adjust to the new, strict prevention control measures as opposed to their counterparts in the other countries. If we just talk about China, the political and social environment has had a huge role in the country's successful containment of the virus. In China, we all know that if a political decision is made, there's hardly any generation loss in its implementation on the ground. That's a big plus when one is tackling a global pandemic like COVID-19. So despite being the world's most populous country, people in China are by and large extremely disciplined and therefore conducive to follow official instructions, which is extremely important in the current scenario. So you can't impose the safety protocols without cooperation of the population, such a big population at that. So that is also very critical. Let me tell you that I am deeply impressed with the sincerity with which the common Chinese people and workers, such as even your building security staff and cleaners, have implemented the safety protocols. So along with the frontline responders like the doctors, nurses, and other healthcare workers, these other civilian workers need to be commended for the sincerity with which they have responded to the emergency. So I think Chinese people, and to a large degree even Japanese and Koreans, are already used to wearing masks routinely. They do it during the flu season, they do it because of pollution, etc. So when China made masks mandatory in public, people followed it without any questions asked. But it's astonishing to see the response elsewhere. I see that there is resistance to the first line of defense, like mask, in many Western countries, with Trump saying that he refuses to wear a mask, despite the CDC advising that masks should be worn in public places.
It's interesting, huh?
So
Because for us living in China, we're so used to seeing and wearing masks ourselves, just like you mentioned, because of the pollution. It's also
exactly.
part of the style even now, but for some reason in Western countries, wearing masks, especially during the pandemic like this, seems to be out of style or out of the ordinary.
Exactly. So this is one of the major differences. I think there have been reports that have come out now suggesting how masks have saved life in China, in Japan, in South Korea. In fact, in Japan, because they are so used to wearing masks, it's almost like a habit in daily public life there. The pandemic didn't spread there as much. So there are ground evidence as to the benefit of the mask. The other aspect that I would like to highlight is that what at times many people outside China are not able to kind of vision or acknowledge, but which is that most importantly, China has built formidable capacities in the past 2-3 decades when it comes to manufacturing, technology, infrastructure, perhaps the best in the world. And these were the major strengths when it came to this war against COVID-19. They were able to deploy resources at an unprecedented scale.
And speed.
And speed, exactly. So, which is not possible in most other countries, I think. For instance, in Beijing, I will just give you an example that I see nearly all offices, residential complexes, and supermarkets, malls, and restaurants screening people with digital thermometer or thermal scanners. Now, these are equipment. You need certain amount of investment and capacities to kind of deploy them at such a mass scale. So these can only be installed at such an enormous scale because China manufactures them, while they are not manufactured in huge numbers in most other parts of the world. We also already know how China built those special quarantine hospitals in Wuhan in just about 10 days, and how it has used mobile phone technology to track the movement of people, which is again extremely crucial in your tracking of all the cases and containing the virus. So all in all, I think China evidently had among the best capacities to fight the situation compared with the supposedly more developed Western countries. Unless people understand the capacities that China has built over the past decades, they will never be able to crack this mystery as to why China achieved such a huge success in this fight against COVID-19, where even the mighty West failed.
Abhishek, you are from India, another
Right.
populous country, the second most populous country in the world.
Right.
Its Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, a couple of weeks ago, announced a complete lockdown of the country. Can
Right.
you tell us what is the situation like in India, and has that worked, and has the Chinese experience play a role in this decision?
So, of course, India is the only other country with a 1.3 plus billion population besides China, but the political and the social structures are radically different. So it is a huge challenge. It is also unprecedented that Prime Minister Modi would come up with such a decision at such a short notice. So lockdown, I believe, is necessary at this moment, as it is universally acknowledged, to kind of flatten the curve, so to speak. So it is certainly a very good decision. There are questions about how it was implemented, whether there could have been a larger, a bigger, notice period, because again, in Indian urban centers have a, thousands, millions of workers that come from rural area, and these are daily wage workers. So the moment the lockdown was announced, with a notice of just 4 hours, they panicked because they didn't know that what they would do. They earn every day, and that's how they sustain their living. And a large number of people started moving towards their native villages and towns. So that would have been a very tragic in a way, because that would actually do just just what is not supposed to be done. It would spread the virus more. But yes, then different state governments eventually they brought in measures to see, they have created these shelters. So I come from Delhi, so I know that the Delhi government immediately responded. They created they kind of transformed the public schools, all the government schools, into public shelters. So a lot of these people were accommodated there. Also, they started providing food, etc. So Delhi government is, for instance, providing food to 12 lakh, which means 1.2 million people on a daily basis. They have also announced some subsidies. So there are these welfare measures that because these are, imposing a lockdown in a country like India is a huge challenge. So it is, while on the one hand it is important step, but on the other hand it may have
produces all these problems.
different different social and economic impacts on a large number of people. So but it is very heartening to see that government and the society is responding to the challenge. They are coming up with some innovative solutions as well. For instance, right now the number of cases are not so high. That's also possibly because India has not tested as many people right now. But in preparation for a third stage outbreak, the railway network in India, which is now under lockdown, just standing still, they have announced that they will convert some of their big trains into quarantine, medical quarantine zones. So it's an innovative solution, just like China, for instance, created these two huge hospitals in Wuhan in 10 days to quarantine people and to cater to the COVID-19 patients. Similarly, India is coming up with a different kind of solution depending on its own resources at hand. So it is very, very challenging for India, yes, because it is not in terms of economy. Also, it's not a very rich country. It's still a developing country at the end of the day, and it has a huge population to attend to. But there are certain strengths, like India has. For instance, it's a producer of the largest producer in the world of generic drugs. And as you would have known that one of the drugs which has been found to be effective to a certain extent in the treatment of COVID-19 patients, the hydrochloroquine. So India is one of the largest producer.
Well, it's a controversial drug right now because the medical community is split down the middle about this drug, and even the top doctor for disease control in the US, Dr. Fauci, you could see from a lot of his interviews, he's against that drug.
Right now, nothing is conclusive, but there are signs, I believe, because I myself did a story about when chloroquine was being tested in China. So chloroquine was one of the drugs which was also clinically tested in China. And later, even Chinese reports suggest that there have been, along with a couple of other drugs like remdesivir and the other drug, I'm forgetting the name, chloroquine was also found to show some positive results. So these are not conclusive yet, but Chinese reports, as well as I believe there have been studies in France, because I've been tracking this news closely. There have been trials in France as well, and they have also found this to be positive. So there is, so of course, there are people who are not convinced as of now, because it may have some side effects as well.
Exactly.
So
yeah.
not everything
originally
is
was
known.
made to fight malaria.
Exactly, it's an anti-malarial drug. But right now, somehow the demand for drug has shot up, particularly after Trump made it public. And India is one of the largest producer of the drug, so it has kind of banned all the exports as of now. And Trump the other day called Prime Minister Modi to, I think, secure access to some of the supplies of this drug. So I believe if it is eventually found to be useful, so India will have some stockpile for its own population. In any case, India, what the point that I was trying to make was that India has its own strengths. So India has been on the forefront of, say, generic drugs manufacturing, although that is also linked to some of the raw elements coming from China. So it's a globalized world at the end of the day. So you have to interact with other countries and get things to eventually come up with the final product. So I'm sure this pandemic will need a global cooperation at an unimaginable scale, and people who are into blame game should refrain from it, and the governments from all over the world should actually cooperate and find a long-lasting solution for this till the time a vaccine comes out. Even for that, I think it will be a global cooperation that will see the face of a vaccine. Right.
Very interesting point you just mentioned that we are living in a globalized world, but
Right.
right now the times are rapidly changing, and there are many articles that are coming out that are basically saying that this is the end of globalization as we know it. In your view, how will the world change after the pandemic?
Certainly, in the near future, with the current restrictions on air travel and border restrictions, etc., it will impact the movement of people for sure. Even in terms of trade and commerce, there will be certain impact which would appear to be seen as backtracking from globalization. But I think in the longer run, again, there will be more collaboration and cooperation globally. So the globalization will not completely go away. People will find ways to interact and collaborate, and eventually find ways to, have this freedom of travel again in place. So much has been talked about the post COVID-19 world already. I personally think that the shift will occur at three levels.
Mm-hmm.
At the individual level, at government and organizational level, and at the geopolitical level. So when I talk about the individual level, already people are now more concerned about personal hygiene and sanitation, for instance. So this will continue even after the pandemic is over. The way they interact with people, which has changed. I think no more handshakes. This will continue for some time. Government and organization, on the other hand, will start giving more priority to, say, healthcare. I'm sure they will start spending more, and we will to kind of enhance their healthcare capacities, and we will see a significant rise in the health budgets in most countries, which will be a positive change, perhaps, because I think most of the world, with the kind of population that we have, need better healthcare facilities. So this will also have a fallout on the economy and industry, where we are likely to see a huge thrust on healthcare and sanitation products and services across the board. So how people consume, the consumption will change, I believe, because your priorities will shift. So even if, as in, I was interviewing one person from the fashion industry, and he was telling me that, look, I think even in the fashion industry, we are already thinking that even luxury consumption will change. It has to have some sort of a healthcare component. Agriculture, for instance, people will be more concerned about where your food is coming from and how healthy it is, and so on and so forth. As in, these things will escalate in times to come. As far as geopolitics is concerned, based on the way countries have dealt with the epidemic, I think their respective strengths and weaknesses are in a way already in the fore. So I think the illusion that the US is a natural world leader at the time of a global crisis, as portrayed in most Western doctrines, as well as in, say, Hollywood movies, for instance, that illusion is over for good. The world will be more pragmatic, and I would hope more a multipolar approach in the near future. So let's see how it plays out. Of course, right now we are at the center of the pandemic, and a lot of things are being said.
Very, very difficult to predict right now.
Exactly.
Knowing human nature, there's also another possibility. We come up with a vaccine. Everybody will start to get vaccinated, and people in 10 years will forget about 2020.
That's true. That's true.
And go back to the way we lived before.
True. But there's one interesting point that I would like to make. That is the ecological and the environmental fallout of COVID-19. And this is rather a positive one, because I mean, the positive stories that are coming as a result of the global lockdown, in terms of, the manufacturing have stopped. Yeah. So in terms of declining pollution, wildlife reclaiming some of its natural habitats, rivers getting cleaner, ozone layer getting back to normal, perhaps.
The world is breathing now. So as humans are suffering, the world is breathing.
Exactly. So as if the planet is healing itself. Yeah. So I personally feel that now, at least there should be some thinking, that whether we need a periodic global lockdown annually, say 15 days in summer followed by 15 days in winter. let the planet Earth have its break too and a time to heal. I think this would be a wonderful idea. So nations and people who would have otherwise been averse to such an idea before will be more conducive to an annual global lockdown. And I think that will be a good way forward.
Well, the planet is breathing better right now at the expense of us, at the expense of the people, as we were developing at the expense of our planet.
True, as in there was a meme that I read that maybe human beings are the virus to the world, the way it has multiplied over the years.
Right.
And maybe COVID-19 is the antivirus.
Yes.
So that's just a way of putting it. But there is some truth in the fact that yes, the way we have been consuming and we have been extracting resources from every nook and corner of the world. I think this huge global pandemic will also make people, to stop and think back on this approach of life, and whether we need to make certain shifts to see that that we don't destroy the planet, and that would be a positive take from this whole experience.
Right. One last question, and I think it's a very important question. Perception is everything, Abhishek. You're working for CGTN. If people want to know about China, they go on CGTN and they watch you guys. Today, we know that during the outbreak of the pandemic, and now we hear and read about cases, especially in the West, that discriminate against China and against the Chinese people. It seems that many people, especially in the West, are going unfortunately, to the darker side of humanity, and racism and discrimination is rising to unprecedented level right now. The virus itself has no borders, it has no face, it has no nationalities. It doesn't matter where the virus is born. What matters is how we tackle it. How would you tackle this potential threat to the Chinese soft power?
No, you're right. As you rightly said that a pandemic or a virus no religion or region or countries. It doesn't discriminate, and it can originate at any place, and it has originated in various countries in the world in the past. So to target a particular country for this is certainly it's not the right approach. I think WHO has made it quite clear that, and that is the reason why they gave an official name to the virus, saying
COVID-19. But unfortunately,
exactly.
Some of the Western leaders are still using.
It is unfortunate that they are trying to, in a way, deflect attention from their inefficiency in handling the issues also. So it could be politics, it is geopolitics. People, of course, are prone to racism across the world because of their ignorance about certain facts. And in such a scenario, basically, we look upon our leaders to give out the right messaging. Unfortunately, that is lacking. When Trump starts calling this a Chinese virus, of course it has an impact. And then you also see a lot of almost like a media campaign against China, saying that China needs to be somehow penalized. It is responsible for this virus, and it should be penalized for spreading this virus. And this is now not only coming from fake news or memes on social media, but also from a Western think tank. So it is think tanks and Western politicians, which is very unfortunate, because at a time when we are all facing this global crisis, and when China has actually, like most objective observers know, that China has worked really hard, despite the fact there was delay in the initial stage of the outbreak, perhaps when the Wuhan officials,
because they tried to figure out what it really was.
Exactly. So this needs to be understood that it was a new virus. Absolutely. The West had an advantage. They knew,
and then you have to share, and that's what they did.
exactly, the West had an advantage of knowing about the virus and the outbreak in China for 4 weeks. And look at how, despite that, they messed it up. So to expect China to be foolproof from day one is crazy. It happens only in a utopian world. China took time to understand what went wrong in Wuhan, but the moment they realized the scale or the threat that this virus posed, I think they took some very serious measures, and they immediately, I think, also, they shared these information with WHO and other world agencies, other countries. They were the first to extract the strain of the virus and share it with all the research institutes. That's how most of the research institutes got started with the vaccine research as such. So to blame China is, I think, is completely wrong, and it is somehow at some level motivated by either domestic politics or geopolitics. As a Chinese media, the challenge for us is, it is a tough climb to kind of make aware people about the facts. We can only tell the facts to people that, look, this is not true. Some of the times what you are being said is wrong. Some of the times, at times, the perception that is being created, it is slanted because of the politics of a particular politician or a leader, or so what CGTN can do is try to give out this alternative side, and that's what we're trying to do. Present the facts, and also try to kind of also bust the, there's almost like a deluge of fake news about China as well, right from talking about its food habits to everything. The whole the Chinese girl eating having bat soup video was a fake video. It was eventually found. So
it wasn't even in China.
It wasn't even in China. It was in Palau, in a Pacific island. So, but it's very difficult when people are already in a way biased. There is a confirmation bias. That's how people consume news these days. They start believing in something, and then they look for news only to kind of support or strengthen that belief further and further and further. So it's a huge challenge, but I'm sure eventually it would be acknowledged that what China has done, or whatever steps it has taken in its own interest. It has taken those steps in the interest of the larger global community. And I believe there is a recognition on that as well, as in there is a section of experts in other parts of the world who see this other side of China as well. So it is a challenge, but we have to constantly keep focusing on presenting the facts. Chinese government just I think yesterday released a whole chronology of all the details that it has shared with the WHO and international agencies. So we have to keep doing that. We have to keep highlighting the things that China has done to contain this virus.
Thank you very much, Abhishek, for coming in and talking to us. I think your points are very, very interesting and valid. And we hope that this outbreak and this virus and this epidemic and pandemic and whatnot will end soon, and we can go back to our normal lives. We don't know how normal it will be, or what is the new normal. But I hope that the world normal will be present in our daily lives. Thank you, Abhishek.
Let's hope for a normal life to come soon, and for the entire world as such. Thank you very much for having me, Olim.
Thank you, brother.